Richard Moore, welcome to the Marketing Study Lab podcast.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's so awesome to be here, and about time as well. My dad is from Liverpool. You're from Liverpool. My dad is actually called Peter as well.
Oh,
so,
wow.
You know, we're related, but it's kind of weird. But thank you so much. I really appreciate being on here.
Fantastic. So many synergies going on already. But just because the synergies doesn't mean you get away without a random opener. So
yes.
A completely random opener. And honestly, I don't know where this came from. I must have been, I don't know, either watching films or listening to music at the time. But anyway, what is your favorite Wonderland? Is it Winter, Alice, or Boogie?
Now, not Alice. Let's do deduction to make life easier. Not Alice, not so fast. Actually, Winter. I think Winter Wonderland. There's a lot of good stuff around that, and I know good gifts are coming as well when it gets Winter Wonderland. Typically from myself to me. So
nice.
So yeah, if selfish reasons, Winter Wonderland. There's my weird logic.
Okay, cool. No, I like that. We love a bit of weird logic on this podcast. So some more sensible discussions then. What's the story that brings you to this point in your career, and what are you up to right now?
Yeah, good question. So the very short version was kind of three main bits that were meant to happen and then developed as they were. So I was in academia I finished my master's, wanting to do a PhD and write books, be a lecturer, and just, I was romantic about being in libraries, like, I don't know, for some reason that was really amazing to me. So I wanted to do that. Didn't get funding, so I needed a job. Because my mother said, you're not going home, you need to get a job, because she was very much push you out there kind of person. So I had to take the first job I could find, and the first interview I had was for a company, so 2002, selling internet marketing. So very interesting, best part of 18 odd years ago, selling something that was quite new for many, and selling. I'm quite the introvert, I was, a studious type, and now I'm cold calling people to try and sell them. But I stuck it out. I wasn't allowed to quit. Again, my mother's influence. And I was like, I just need to kind of keep pushing through. So I went through a lot of iterations of sales, and I've always been in that space. So, after a year or two, I was becoming a sales manager and so on, and went through different types of sales, different companies and so on. Ultimately, I left corporate London in 2013. I was a sales director at a headhunting company, and I started my own consulting business. I was actually already doing a bit of offline consulting, helping people learn how to sell without being difficult or irritating. And what happened was very quickly evolved to leveraging online. So first Facebook out of 2014 into 2015, then into Instagram, and then to LinkedIn from 2018. And so what I do today, to answer your second question, is I coach corporate and online as well. So really from startups and entrepreneurs and solopreneurs through to big corporates on two things. So depending on what they're after, usually it's sales and like advanced sales and making sure they close their big deals, because they need to make sure that this money comes in to keep things afloat, especially in a time like this. All the way through to my LinkedIn Client Accelerator, which focuses on helping people understand how to convert through a content-led approach on LinkedIn. So specifically on LinkedIn. And I focus on that because it's you must see this more than most, this worry that there's a lot of people that spend huge amounts of resource on content, and at best they get engagement and following and noise and attention is created, but there's no translation into sales. So that moment to pivot elegantly and get people what they deserve really is really an amazing thing to be able to help people with, because just by virtue of the fact of being on the pitch for this amount of time means I've got a good handle on how to do it. And it's great. It's really nice, people having that kind of sense that they're getting real results they deserve now. So it's a really kind of fulfilling space. There's a few other things as well, but in the main there's that. And I've done a lot of charity-based business events until the pandemic hit us. Which were really cool. Literally across the world, we did 26 of them from Melbourne to San Francisco. Wow. And that was, it was a LinkedIn and a sales thing. And all of it was demonstrating that you can bring an attention and convert it. And because I wanted to kind of give back a bit, literally everything made from those events went to local charities. So it was really nice to raise money from that kind of leverage, I suppose, as well. It's really a nice thing to run in tandem with the consulting work.
That's excellent. I think one point I just want to pick up on there was near the very, very start when you were talking about, you were looking at libraries, and I can imagine what's going through your head there, that nostalgic sunlight coming through. You can see the dust in the background, all books and historic. Yeah, absolutely. But you said you were introverted as well, and you certainly don't come across as that. That's the last thing I would say you are, and that's not to say that introverts can't, when they're on camera or when they're doing their work, look as if they're extrovert where really they're introverted. But do you think that there was a pivot point, or because you said you weren't really into sales or being introverted, it wasn't really, the cold calling aspect wasn't really for you? Was it like you found your passion, or was it you had to really teach yourself these types of things?
Such a good question. And because if you go back further, I was never a very social child, like a late bloomer. And if you go back to like when I'm 14, and everyone, I can see it now, everyone's outside playing on the school field, playing football or whatever, or chasing girls, and I'm programming in the computer lab. Like, that's what I was like, And so what was interesting is that I think I don't know if it's an omnivert or an ambivert, but basically I really like my own company. I get a lot of energy just from my own company and from the quiet and the focus. But I don't, it's weird. It's a weird thing, Peter, where like chasing the social and chasing being around people doesn't feel natural. But I've definitely conditioned myself to anchor it to positive outcomes. Okay. And when I'm doing it, I get a lot of great energy. So being around people is also amazing. So when I'm in that moment, I'm still good. And I think, to answer your question, it's really interesting because Seth Godin's latest book, The Practice, kind of talks about this, not just looking at outcomes and doing what you love, but it's loving what you do and loving the process. So yeah, I wasn't into sales, but what I was really into was understanding the process, and by sticking out the sales, and getting commission is a wonderful thing when you're 22. You just like, you feel that you can take over the world. It really did. Again, it was another example of anchoring the positive to that kind of process. So I've always been a lover of good process that delivers great outcomes, and that's, I think, what came out of it. So in those early years, abusive though the relationship with sales was, because cold calling is hard, and some days you're like, why am I doing this? But at the same time, it was like there was such upside, and discovering yourself and putting yourself on the front line and really learning at the sharp edge what business can be like, the real soft skills, was actually quite thrilling. And I think I've always been quite mindful of things that can help, despite me maybe having some kind of natural aversion to them. So I felt I'm certainly quite the stoic, and I pushed myself through, knowing that this was good for me. And that's kind of a story I've repeated through my career. Is like, just because you don't want to do it, it doesn't mean you shouldn't. And actually, if the upside is strong enough, do it despite the emotional pushback. And so I really think that I fell in love with the process. And if you look at what I do now, I think anyone who does, for instance, my accelerator will agree that I very much bring the science and the theory made practical. So I do like to go deep, and I've gone as far as behavior and psychology and stuff like that, because it's really fascinating. So ever the student, I think, and that's nice that trait has come through. But I like looking at taking theory and things and making process and systems that have great outcomes. So it's been an interesting one, and I think I definitely have evolved somewhat. I think there's still an introvert in me that loves the peace and quiet, and perversely is kind of quite okay with the lockdown we have in the UK at the moment. But simultaneously, desperately missing all the travel we were doing back in 2019 because of seeing all these great people that you and I have as mutual connections. In fact, it's really tough to miss that.
I think that's something that a lot of listeners will relate to, the fact that it might be something that they don't want to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it. And I think we've all been there where you get that little inkling, almost I can't be bothered, or I could easily avoid this, but that's probably the worst thing you can do. And then I love the fact, because absolutely what I love to do is get that theory, particularly within marketing, and then link it to practical application or some kind of process, or make it from the point of view of this can actually help you in the future. This is why we should be using these things.
Yeah, quite right. I think so. I mean, it's always nice when even with a lot of experience, it's always nice to learn something new and say, I can drop that into the process I've got. So it's always nice to keep learning, and I make a point every single day of making sure there's a period of reading and so on. And I just think it's good to do that kind of thing rather than think you know it all. But yeah, that's hopefully something a lot of us share.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to move on to some actionable tips, and your skills are clearly in the sales process, if like, regardless on whether it's global, whether it's corporate, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever the field. So what I'd like to do first and foremost is there's a few areas that I want to cover. Sales is certainly not something that I feel I'm strong at, far from it. So I'm basically going to learn from you here for free. No, so
that's fine. I can help as much as I can.
And then I'd just like to uncover some actionable tips. So the first area I'd like to cover is getting into the right mindset, which is interesting from your backstory in terms of pushing through that. Because I think the mindset of selling gets in the way and holds people back. So how do we get into that right mindset?
Yeah, and certainly if you look at those who are starting out, because if you've done it long enough, you have enough confirmation bias in play, positive confirmation bias, that actually you can do it. And there are peaks and troughs, and it's easy to say to someone, don't worry, you'll have ups and downs and you get rejection, but then you also get positives as well. That's easier said than done. And what's interesting is that certainly doing a lot of corporate coaching of new starters in sales, the thing that stands out is the pressure that people put themselves under when it comes to selling, met with an aversion to doing it because they don't want to be rejected. It's social anxiety gone crazy when you go and approach someone for selling. So what I find is interesting is that people start going, right, I've got to make this first phone call, or I'm going to approach someone live at a trade show. This is really scary. And what it is their expectations are at the wrong level. And I feel it's a really important tip to think about the outcomes or objectives you should have in mind. If it's my first day, and I remember saying this to someone once, if it's your first day on the phone, for instance, and you're going to make some calls to try and pitch a company or something, your objective shouldn't be trying to close sales. That would be marvelous. But your objective should be to dial, 10 numbers in the first hour. If someone picks up, good for you. If someone puts you through to the decision maker, wonderful. But at the end of that period, you should be able to tick those boxes and say, I did those first calls. That's great. The next few days, it's naturalizing to a first level. And then you move up a level. Like now, today, I want to get 2 pitches, 2 decision makers. That's my next objective. And ultimately, you don't jump in and say, I'm going to try and get a deal today. Again, the intention should always be kind of in the back of your mind. I would love to get one, and I've trained myself as much as I can. But you need to remember that you are the level you're at, and experience is the best tutor. And you do find that if you're not getting the wins in terms of deals at the very start, that's a great way of crushing yourself. And it's not a good way it's not a healthy way of starting any job, let alone a sales one. So that is the thing. Like, this is something that's so prevalent, I find, is that people are setting their sights too high. Yeah. And they're trying. It's the same with marketing, as you can imagine. Like their first Facebook ad or the first post, they do all the theory in the post. It's like, why haven't I got any deals? Because you've done one piece of content. Like, persevere, man. And I just think it's important to get that kind of perspective right.
It very short-term thinking as well. That whole, I'm going to phone somebody up and the first 4 calls, well, I'm bound to get a sale. And rather than looking at the long-term, building up your skills, knowing it's a long process. And like you said, if you get in touch or directed to that decision maker, that's, in the first instance, take that as a win. That's one next step closer to where you want to be.
And when someone says no, like a great example is working with a lot of kind of entrepreneurs who are starting their businesses, and they go all the way to the end of the process, and then that person says no. And all it is because there was a little bit of poor pre-qualification at the start of the process. And they had this person's like, this is great, I think we should do this, I run the company, I think it's a great idea to do whatever it is. And then they say, you know what, I can't stomach, I haven't got the money, I can't stomach the cost. And what's so important is to not feel like, do you know what, there's no deal, I can't do this. It's like, actually, if there was one change here in like, if that person just had enough money, that would have been a deal. So there's no question of my ability to do the job. It's just that I need to tweak this one thing. And often in selling, what people need to recognize is a no doesn't mean complete failure. A no means maybe one or two components were off, but most of it you actually did really well. So it sounds bad because a lot of people are like, well, it's not positive unless you get a deal, but the truth is, because it's good experience. And especially in the world that you and I inhabit, if you look at a lot of the online-based selling, if you don't get a deal, you often at the very least end with a really good connection, and that's worth something as well, you know?
Yeah. So picking up on something you mentioned there, that's understanding your client, target market, that kind of thing, massively linked to marketing. How do we make sure we're gaining the attention of the right type of people then?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways of doing it depending on your approach. There are some corporates I work with and their entire approach is cold outbound. And so what they need to do is make sure that as much as is possible, they're looking at companies that probably tick certain boxes, like I'm speaking to the right person and they probably have enough money. When I was doing that, the hack I found was, if I'm approaching a company cold, who else have I worked with that has some mutual kind of commonality with them? And so what I always did was I'd say, right, who am I working with already? I would find a client, we already working with them, the person's name, and I do searches of any company aligned with that one, and then that's the next one I pitch. Because the truth is, if you're one of my clients, Peter, and you've got a friend that also runs a business, it makes much more sense for me to approach that person and say, I'm actually working with Peter. It just makes sense to show what I've been working with them. The reason why is it dissolves the human like barriers that the animal part of our brain puts up because they're an unknown person. If I'm approaching someone cold, then I would rather approach them with a mutual connection because it makes my approach okay. Whereas if I literally have no commonality with that person, the barriers are up because that's naturally how we're built. The other extreme, of course, is more content-led, which you and I certainly are big fans of these days. And you pre-qualify by creating a reason why the ideal buyers should spend time around you. So content provides a form of gravity, if you like, and it might be boring as hell to most people, but it is specifically focused on a particular niche, and a certain set of people find that valuable with consistency. Then their continued showing, the fact they keep showing up is a very good tell that maybe that's a demonstration of qualification right there, and they're worth an approach. So there's a whole spectrum we can work through, from nothing to warming them quite considerably through marketing ahead of any kind of call or try and attempt at a close.
I love the whole fact that you mentioned gravity and content together, because it's just such a powerful image to see that, and it's so right. You know, gravity that's what it does. It pulls you in slowly or fast or whatever it is, and content should do that.
But I think that metaphor, I often use that metaphor, and I have evolved it because if you can imagine your content by extension is you, of course, that gravity brings someone close. But the point is, you don't want it just to be like, oh, that's interesting, then they move on. You want them to come into orbit around you. And they stay in orbit around you when you keep firing out great content. And, you know, there are certain YouTube channels I can't get enough of because they are like, I can completely nerd out. And basically, they are my TV show. Whenever a video goes out, I'll watch that because that's awesome. Other stuff just doesn't hold my attention. And this is a great signifier of someone who's really qualifying themselves, is if you are consistently putting out that kind of bait, for want of a better word, and someone continually is in orbit, so demonstrated by them consistently writing comments and engaging, it's a very good sign that there's someone there who has some interest. And then, you know, it's natural. It's the easiest pivot in the world to say, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for the recent engagement. How are you? And then we move naturally to, oh, it's fine, Richard. Thank you. I love your content. I think it's brilliant. Good. Do you? And then the obvious question after that is, well, what in particular resonates? This stuff, because I need a hand with it. And then you're off, you know. So just, you know, it doesn't have to be difficult. I think when you're taking this approach, and I struggle to understand why companies aren't using the content-led approach. I struggle to understand logically why they don't do it, but emotionally, I know the reason why is because it feels like it's not very transactional, and it's a patience play, isn't it? That's
Yeah, I wholeheartedly with you on that one. You can see it from a C2C point of view, or even, you know, small business to customer point of view, but almost B2B. It's a difficult sell for them to take it, because like you said, it's not transactional in the first instance. It's building up that relationship in a different way to what traditionally they probably are used to doing.
Quite right. And the thing is, this is why 2020 was a very interesting year, I found, because I was always able to onboard clients, but the relevancy I had increased, because in the past, companies would say, you could almost hear them thinking to themselves, yes, LinkedIn, sure, online content-based selling, but we're fine at the moment. Like, we meet people, and often that was one of the big objections I had in the 2000s when I'd be like, you know, there's this thing called the internet, and that we're able to get huge visibility and conversion. And they'd say, well, you know, when we meet people every year in trade shows and things like this. And now it's very interesting that people are saying, you know, that whole LinkedIn thing, Richard, kind of need to know how to do it, because I have to sit at home all day long, you know, between homeschooling and working. And so it's an interesting world that has kind of forced this hand, and online was for many years a very important part of the playbook. But certainly now it's like it's essential to have that down. It's make or break for many businesses. And you see, even as far as sales in high street retail, one of the reasons why some businesses are totally going under, the difference between Topshop and Zara is their online component. It's being shown, and like that's just like the embracing of it is important. So it's interesting how the world's changed, and it's kind of come to us in relevance, I suppose.
I think 2020 was a great leveler in some respects, or it just increased things exponentially by way of these things would happen eventually. It just sped them up in terms of, I'm talking business rather than, you know, real world things that are going on. But, you know, in business and digital and how we communicate and technology, it certainly sped things up for me, or that's how I saw it.
I agree. And specifically the Zoom call, because the best way, if you take fear out of the equation, the best way to interface with a prospect and sell them is face to face, because they have so many more, you have more visual cues, and they can go off much more in terms of emotion, that as opposed to email, for instance. I don't care what any email marketer says, face to face does beat it every time. What's interesting is that it's changed in that face to face's best variant that you can use right now is Zoom calls, for instance. But if you go back 10 years, the headhunting company I was at, the team, we always did calls over Zoom chat, because you could get so much, even back then, because you get so much from them. And it was stunning to me that companies would just use a phone when you can use a call. So wherever possible, any sales call I do is never on the phone, it's by Zoom chat. And I love the fact that it's no longer like a niche thing for people. It is the way, like, everyone's used to doing it, and you get so much better. The results are crazy. So one of the biggest tips in selling, if you're used to the phone, I dare you, try it by Zoom chat or anyway, or Skype, because the visual is like, it really just releases barriers and gets the focus as well. If I'm on a phone, I can totally check my emails. You know, it wouldn't be cool if I was, you know, on TikTok whilst I'm doing this chat, you know what I mean? It wouldn't go down so well. So I just think it's important to remember that the visual is a massive persuasion factor in terms of selling.
But for anyone that's listening and not watching on YouTube, Richard isn't on TikTok, by the way. I can see him, and I can guarantee he isn't. Well, I can kind of, yeah. Now he's got his phone, and now I'm not so sure because it's just out of peripheral vision. So,
I've got a feed to another screen, maybe. Yeah. No, I promise. It's all about you.
Absolutely, yeah, brilliant. So the next part that I want to cover is probably the hardest part or the easiest part to go, oh, okay, that didn't work then. And that's the dealing with objections. It's so easy you get an objection like, okay, well, that's fine. See you later. How is the best way to deal with objections? And at some point it's clear that it isn't for them or it isn't for you, but how's the best way to deal with objections that might be thrown at you?
Firstly, it depends where in the process it is.
Okay.
Because if you have an objection at the very start, what's known as a knee-jerk objection, because there are two main types. The knee-jerk objection is representation of not being interested in you. Knee-jerk objection will be like, oh, just send me an email, or I don't have time, I'm not interested, or whatever. You could be Richard Branson, and if you get it wrong and just not interested, it's so important still to recognize that you are getting some really good feedback. And whenever I hear people say, oh, I've had a terrible day, I've had everyone's hanging up on me. There's no conspiracy where all these leads got together and said, let's just hang up on this person. What's happened is you're getting feedback. If you're the constant on all of these phone calls, for instance, what's standing out is that something you're doing or putting out there represents a particular type of interaction that historically they're found to be a waste of time. So basically you are telegraphing that you are like a set of people that typically they have conditioned themselves to believe aren't going to be of use. So great feedback. So you've got to record yourself. What am I saying? I remember when I first started selling, I was like, I listened to myself the first time. I was like, I sound like a game show host. And so why? Of course no one wants to listen because I sound too cheesy. And when you sound like you're just reading a script or something like that, you've got to get away from that because people don't trust the unknown, especially people they don't know, because they feel they've got an agenda. People are fine with being sold to by people they want to be sold by. So you need to make sure that you have a bit more of a human touch, if you like. The other type of objection, which is a bit more robust, if you like, is a real one, which doesn't represent them not being interested. It actually represents a level of interest, but there's an issue. And the reason why it represents a level of interest is because they're willing to actually say what the problem is usually. And often you get this through the process of pitching or sharing the value proposition. All the way through to the end. And in fact, when you go back sometimes, if you're going to follow up with them, if that's your process, you may well find that they have an issue there. And the reason why they're sharing it is because they're kind of there, but they're not hanging up on you or not ignoring or ghosting you. They're willing to give you a bit of feedback, which represents there was an element of interest to a degree. So how do you handle them? Well, the question is, firstly, how bad is your objection? Are you completely off point? Are they completely irrelevant to you? In which case you deserve it because you're trying to sell someone who's not right. But on the basis that on paper they should be a really good fit, the money's right and that kind of thing, often it's not actually the product, and often it's not even your process. Often it's just the connection with you. So there was some science done on this a while back, and this really is important to understand about objections, but also about pitching and selling in general. It was said that something in the region of 10%, I think it was like 8% of the reason why anyone buys anything is the actual product. So for instance, if I'm buying an iPhone, it's the particular chip and the frequency at which it runs at, and the amount of RAM and the size of the screen. About 30% is the actual process used to close you, but most of the rest of it, so like 60% is the connection. So like how much they trust you, how much they want to buy from you. If someone comes up to you in a car park and says, do you want to buy this phone? You're like, no. Whereas if precisely the same person suddenly is surrounded by an Apple store, which is designed to make you fall in love with everything beautiful there, then what happens is you feel different because you've conditioned yourself, this is a place you trust. So usually an objection, if it doesn't feel that there's anything obvious, and they're giving you like a soft no, like, oh, it's just not quite the right time or a right fit, they're often like just not vibing with you enough, and it kind of sucks, but sometimes it's down to that. But the other things could be quite nuanced. It could be, that it's just that you've got the wrong person is a really big problem for a lot of corporate salespeople. They will rather pitch the person who will listen than the person who decides, because it's easier. It's easy to get yes out of someone who's a non-decision maker, right? And if you go, my job, I was like told off when I first started work. If I didn't pitch a managing director or a CEO or a president, it's like, that's all you're pitching. That's the end of it. And you have to do it 4 times a day. So if you're like, I'll just pitch to a marketing manager today because that'll be easier. Like, obviously they're keen, but they never get a deal. So or if you do, it takes a long time. So handling objections, it's about asking the right questions and letting them talk. The biggest mistake people, like those who have had terrible or no training, is you got a problem, therefore let's try a discount, and it doesn't work. Because what happens is, if there's nothing about your product to differentiate it between any others, then people don't see a reason why they should choose you over something else. So giving them a big discount may provide a differentiator, but you're taking a lot of the value, the perception of value out of what you're doing. Price should be very much the last thing we ever touch. Typically, the problem they have is not the money. Almost never is it the money. And you cannot fix problems with making a discount. If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. If someone says to me, do you want to go and watch, Everton play? I don't know if you're an Everton fan. Then the answer is no. And it's like, but what about if the tickets were cheaper? The answer's still no. It doesn't change the reason. So what you end up doing is killing yourself, because it doesn't really make a difference. So the process should be simple. It should be listen, acknowledge that there's an objection in the first place, don't ignore it. So after acknowledging it, then you ask a few questions, like you say, so, what do you feel the issue is? And understand it from their point of view. Because the truth is, from their perspective, the objection is right. Based on the level of information they know, it's right. And you may not agree with them, but currently with what you've given them, they feel that way. So what we need to do is, after we've asked a little bit why, we need to then do what we need to do to handle it. So don't prove them wrong, because no one wants to be proven wrong. You may win a battle, but you lose the war in the end. It's important to show them there's another way of thinking about it. Do your best to handle it. So if they have a problem with the way logistically you'll deploy your service, well, then explain to them that you'll be helping them in a certain way and why it works, or whatever it might be. But the crucial part is, once you feel you've handled it, you need to check. And most people don't do that. They kind of feel they've handled it, then they move on. And no objection's ever handled until you are convinced that they are convinced that it is, that it's dealt with. Because if I say, does that make sense? Can you see why I do it this way? Hopefully that answers your, allays your fears and worries, whatever. And they say, yeah, I guess, I suppose. And if I move on, they're still thinking about the objection. So unless the objection is blown out of the water, it's still there and it's probably on their mind. So I need to take that process and always check. If they're like, that makes sense then, totally understand now, I'm with you, now I can move on. Otherwise, that problem will always be there. You can't ignore the objections and hope they'll go away, I'm afraid. But usually the best way to handle objections is not retrospectively. So I really want to make this point, because this is very much contrary to what most sales trainers will teach. They teach how to handle objections, which is, when you get this objection, say this thing. When you get that objection, say that thing. And you have the scripts and so on. The worst way to handle objections, aside from ignoring them, is retrospectively like that, because it's happened, and you have to kind of scrabble back, and you can, to a degree, kind of lose your position as this expert who can help. Far better, and it takes a bit of time because you have to have a number of pitches to realize it. Far better is to say to yourself, let's do an audit. There are only 6 objections in the world anyway, like money, timing, whatever. What one do I keep getting? And the best way to handle an objection, I always found, is to preemptively strike against the objection ever coming up in the first place. So, for instance, the reason why, this is a really rubbish example, but the reason why no one later on goes, but I don't know your name, is because at the start I've told them what my name is, right? So it's the same here. So if they constantly have a problem with your premium price point, you need to deliver a little nugget of information in the first 30-second proposition as to why you're premium. And then that doesn't come up so much.
Yeah.
No one buying a Rolls Royce has a problem with the price, because there's true, because there's the primer of culturally there have been, I don't think there's like so much marketing for Rolls Royce, but culturally we are educated and brought up to think Rolls Royce is worth lots of money and they are premium products. So you don't go to buy one unless you're going to spend a lot of money. So the objection doesn't come up about money. I bet those people buying the latest smartphone probably don't have the money issue so much as their objection, because they're out to spend 1,300 quid on a phone. So preemptively striking is the best thing. And all people listening, if they're selling, should be asking themselves, what's the number one objection? And what can I insert at the front of the call or meeting or whatever that would actually handle that kind of objection so it never comes up? So for many, the best way to do the price one, for instance, if you're really a premium product, is to say something like, to make the point that you are premium and work with best in class. And like, we are different because we are a premium price point. And then people are, if you do it right, then people are absolutely fine with it. And that doesn't come up because that was already conditioned at the beginning, you see. You can tell there's a whole lecture on objection handling under the bonnet, but that's kind of the TLDR.
Well, it's a big topic, and probably the main one that stops people getting to where they want to be is the objections that they have. I'm just so glad that you picked up on the pricing, and you said it should be the last thing that changes, because fundamentally for me, bit on my soapbox here, but that's the difference between good all-round marketer, bad all-round marketer. Bad all-round marketer focuses on comms, promotion, discount. Good all-round marketer does the whole marketing mix, which includes place, the actual product, is it good enough? And also price. If you set the price before you are doing anything, there's a reason. You understand the market, you understand the value it offers, you understand the actual product and how much it took to produce and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's not preempting that objections, that's the sales part, but it's starting from a basis where this is why we've got this value. And if people can understand that internally and externally, then price isn't the argument.
Yeah, and I think diving into your own product or service and saying to yourself, what are all of the items of value? Now, which ones do we draw out as of most value to the set of people who are the ideal customer? And it's really fascinating that sometimes you have a lot of different points of value, if you like, or benefits, and the salesperson hones in on the things they think are coolest or best. But actually, you need to resonate most with the people who are buying. And over time, you get really down with the stuff that people really, really like the most. And then you can augment those more in your marketing and in your selling process, and often not mention other things at all. You know what I mean? So that's the bottom line. Again, I keep using iPhone as an example, even though I haven't got one. iPhone doesn't brag about its chip. Even though it's really good. It brags about how it's a luxury piece of art. That's his kind of big thing. It's got a great camera or whatever it might be. So it focuses on certain things and not on others. Whereas other types of phone or other smartphone manufacturers would focus on other USPs. It really makes a big difference. So that is a demonstration of thinking about the audience and what's going to lead them to be down with spending that kind of money. It really is important.
And that differentiator as well, like you say, it's if you're going to focus on that tech, that's your target audience, and you own that part of that market. Just full disclosure, I don't know about you, Richard, but I do buy a lot of my goods from men in car parks. So particularly around Christmas time. So anyone that's listening, apologies if you didn't like the one-handed teddy bear that I got you for Christmas, but it was fairly cheap. He did me a deal.
I use that example because it happened to us once. My wife and I were going to buy a second-hand car, for her to get another car. So we went down all these different car showrooms, like which ones we look at, and there was this one, and it was like, I'll meet you at this place. Like, it's weird, but like the car was amazing. It was like the latest spec. It had no mileage. It was awesome. I was like, we'll check it out. And the dude was like flip-flops and shorts in a car park, and he's like, do you want to get in and look? I'm like, no thanks. And the worst part was like, I can't buy your product, man, because because it may look legit, but it doesn't feel it. That's the problem. And so positioning and how it looks and how you dress it all up is really crucial.
Absolutely. So, final actionable tip I just want to touch upon quite briefly, because it was more about getting to the overcoming objections and getting to that sale point, and that's what next. So, you know, you've got that sale, and what do you do now? It's like happy days, sign the contract, away you go. What should we be doing there?
When we've closed a deal?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What's interesting is that we're closing a deal for the prospect isn't about the moment when they're signing a deal. It's about the relationship and the steps they're going to have afterwards. So when I buy a TV, I don't care about the moment when I'm buying the TV. That's just a necessary circumstance of the kind of the transaction. What I'm excited about is getting home and trying all the new tech out. And it's the same for them. The buyer is interested in the journey afterwards. Okay. So a good sell, just to answer your question first, I have to start with the good sell represents the seller focusing on what will be happening afterwards. Because if you focus, and so next steps, if you're focusing too much on the deal and the moment of the deal, you're projecting or at them that all you care about is closing the deal and getting the money. They care more about the things that come in afterwards. So but the moment it comes in, the moment it's signed off and the money's in the bank, job one is a connection with them. I would always send them a message or something, a voice memo in these days you should be leveraging, because it's a great way of saying, hey, you know, payment received with thanks. I'm now doing this. I'm sending over this and this. Like for me, for instance, my accelerator, it would be like, I'm sending you, you know, you're getting the welcome email and the access to the course. What I'm also going to do, I'm going to introduce you now to the group chat. They're going to love you. I can't wait to introduce you. So I'm taught like the deal is an incidental moment. The problem with salespeople is that they blow this up to be this major thing. That it should be almost just like in the same way as you're breathing in and out, we do the deal part. It's just a very incidental moment. The big focus, the big sing and dance part is afterwards, where you onboard them, and it's like the parading out this new client and make them feel great. What you don't want to do is go silent. So next steps, like send over the invite instantly for the first catch-up call. Send them an email with, you know, I often do, like, I send them an email with a few questions on their process because I'm really interested in learning that. Get working on this stuff straight away, but like organize that first call with them and get this sense that you're really pumped about stepping forward and working with them. What it does is it makes them feel good that they're in safe hands and you've got process behind looking after them. Because what they're really buying is the feeling that you've got this. Yeah. Not that you've had all this interaction, now you've gone silent, because it suggests that you're not so bothered, and that might represent the kind of interaction you'll have further down the line. And what the last thing you want to do is leave them in the cold, because that's where buyer's remorse gets amplified, where they're like, oh man, I just spent a lot of money and now they're not getting back to me. Like, it's been 2 days, what am I doing? Like, and that's, you don't want to have that kind of thing at all. So Rolls Royce them, as my old
I like that.
That process, you know what I mean?
It's like building a friendship, isn't it? Absolutely.
Quite
it's,
right.
You know,
and show that you're genuinely interested in what they get, not just.
Absolutely, yeah. Money's a side point at that junction. So, Richard,
although
are you ready?
Although it isn't, you just don't show it, you know.
Yeah, no, but yeah, for the point of view of the relationship, it is just like you said. It is just one other stage, massively important on both sides, but it needs to be just seen as another stage. So, Richard, are you ready for some quick fire questions to finally wrap up?
I always like these ones.
Right, brilliant. What was the last thing you remember Googling?
By voice, I'll cheat here, Peter. By voice, I remember doing a search on Stefan Schwartzman, who runs the BlackRock hedge fund. Okay. I can't remember if it was BlackRock or Blackstone. Blackstone kind of happened afterwards through someone who's part of it. Well, so that's a dull answer, but that's the answer.
Brilliant. Love it. Right, let's move on. What's the most important thing to know about sales right now?
Right now is that you don't have to pitch people. You can create a world where they come to you. and with a tiny bit of patience, you suddenly feel very fulfilled in your role, because people are like happy to explore working with you, rather than saying, go on then, I've got 5 minutes, do your pitch. And it's far more fulfilling. So please embrace it if you're not. It really is important.
Absolutely. Why do you love what you do?
I love, well, it's only one, like, honestly, it's beyond the money. It's beyond everything. What I love is people who are frustrated with what they're doing. So I mostly work with consultants and coaches on getting conversion. And the results, and I love it because, and I kind of throw LinkedIn coaches under the bus, I know, because they're like, you know, well, we got lots of profile views and look, I'm getting lots of engagement and things, whereas instead I'm like, let's get you deals. And I had someone in December who joined my accelerator, and she had a 5-figure month. And I remember in the last week saying, how's the month going? She said, I've now had a 5-figure week. I had someone who at the start of this year did a 30 grand deal from one post.
Brilliant.
Dollars, but still good. Someone who did 8 sales in 2 weeks, all from like content and the process of conversion that I teach, from, you know, pivoting out of content to DMs to a call to a deal. It doesn't have to be difficult. They're not spamming DMs all the time, but just like the moment when they're like, oh wow, this is so good, and then the belief, you know, that they can. Oh, it's so good, because the truth is that usually the people I work with, they've been on the pitch for a while, had skin in the game, they've been in corporate maybe maybe like 10 years or so, and they're fed up of like putting so much time and work into content, getting nothing. So now it's like, that's it. Like I'm getting the rewards I want. I just think there's no greater feeling. I can have that all day long. I absolutely love it.
Fantastic. Finally, and most importantly, if people want to find out more about yourself, what you offer, what you can do for them, where should they go?
Yeah, so I do have a website, therichardmoore.com. However, I prefer connecting properly with people. So, you know, you can email me, richard@therichardmoore.com, but let's get on LinkedIn. So if you go to linkedin.com/in/Richard James Moore, I'd love to meet people. It'd be really awesome. And because I'm a little bit fussy, because you want to connect with people who aren't just building connections for the sake of it. If someone did want to connect, say, you know, I listened to the podcast, that kind of makes sense, then we can take it from there. But I would love to connect with people, and if they want to discuss further conversion and sales and so on, I'm more than happy to. It's like my Netflix, Peter.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Anyone that's listening, check out Richard on LinkedIn, check out his live Q&A, get involved in it, connect with him. He'll discuss this stuff all day. And finally, Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. Absolute pleasure.
I absolutely enjoyed myself. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll do it again in the future.
Too right, we will.